Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this evening's conversation. If you're joining us from other parts of the world, then good morning, or indeed good afternoon. It is really a great privilege for me to introduce this evening's fireside conversation, and in particular to welcome two fellows of our college, people who have had a very, very close association with our college over a number of years. Professor Frank Dunn is of course one of our past presidents, and Frank has a great interest in medical history. And our second guest this evening is Sir Kenneth Calman, who's had an incredible career and a very varied career. Having graduated from Glasgow, he initially was interested in vascular and transplant surgery. He then spent a little time at the Royal Marsden Hospital, and from there grew his interest in palliative care and oncology. He had an oncology unit and was the first Professor of Oncology at the University of Glasgow. He then became Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, and I think must be in the unique position of the only person ever to have been Chief Medical Officer in Scotland and then Chief Medical Officer in England. I've heard his time described as Chief Medical Officer as to when he found himself in the shark-infested zone between medicine, politics, and the public. And I'm sure our current Chief Medical Officers sometimes feel as though they're in that challenging zone as well. It is a very, very great pleasure for me to welcome both of our guests this evening. I'm sure we're in for a real treat in this conversation, and I'm now delighted to hand over to Frank Dunn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Ladies and gentlemen, can I also extend a warm welcome to you all to this conversation with Sir Kenneth Calman in regard to his autobiography entitled It Started in a Cupboard. The format for the evening is that Ken and I will discuss the book for around 45 minutes, and then we will have questions which you can submit via the chat box. Please feel free to submit your questions as we go along. We have over 300 registrants from around the UK and beyond, and I think this reflects very much the many areas of Ken's life. This speaks volumes also for the regard that we all hold Ken in and the interest in his life story to date. Ken, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
Ken, we live in unprecedented times, and I know our audience would be interested to hear how you and your family are coping with all the challenges and the restrictions presented by COVID.
Well, it's been difficult, as everybody knows, and my interest in this time have been several, because we've just moved house right in the middle of it. So we've had lots of other things to get together, but going for walks with the dog has been one of my special interests. And the second, of course, is writing and reading. And I'm writing some stuff on Robert Burns at the moment. It's given me plenty of time to do that, although some of my books are still misplaced somewhere in an old garage somewhere. But once that's sorted out, it'll give me more time to think, more time to write, and that's my great pleasure.
Yes, and I think many people have diversified their interests over this period of time, and I think in the long term there will be these unexpected beneficial effects from what has been a very difficult time. Ken, we have much to cover from the book in regard to your multifaceted career and interests, but the first chapter on your early life, I must say, I found as captivating as any. It starts intriguingly. I was born on a day of peace in a world at war. What are your key memories of your childhood, and tell us about that famous cupboard?
Well, I was born on Christmas Day, 1941. I may even, just 9 months after the Clydebank Blitz, so I may even have been conceived in an air raid shelter. my mum and dad were wonderful. My father particularly took me to football matches on his shoulders and played with me. And he was working in the shipyards in Scotland during the war. After the war, as I was growing up, it was great to have him with me. And then on the 25th of June, 1951, he died. It was just tragic. I was 9, my wee brother was 6. And it was quite difficult to get on after that. My mother had a widow's pension, and we needed some more money. So she took in boarders from Jordan Hill College, PE students, and they were like big brothers to us, and they were great to have. But the two of them slept in one bedroom, my wee brother and I on the other bedroom, and my mother lay out on the couch in the sitting room. It was difficult to do any work and that kind of thing, and I suddenly realized that we had a nice big cupboard in the hall. I went into the cupboard, and it had a shelf which was just about desk size and desk height, but no lights. So I brought in candles in a tin box, and that's where my academic career began, in a cupboard.
Well, that's very interesting and very innovative of you to use that facility. And your mother sounds to me to be like a tremendous character, really, to do what many women had to do in those days, bring up a young family on her own. So she must have left you a tremendous legacy, really.
Yeah, she was wonderful, and talk about later music. Her name was Grace, and my granddaughter's name is Grace. And don't sing Amazing Grace to me, because I just go and cry.
Oh, that's lovely. And of course, your father, I always think, reading your book, that some of the seeds of what you developed in your life came from your father. I mean, his interest in music, you mentioned that you could hear him coming home every day singing Woody the Woodpecker song. And he also had one or two great rhymes and poems, indeed, which you may have inherited from him, and some quite moving poems about yourself. And so on.
He was good at that. He was good at that, and it's interesting. I still miss him. 60 years on.
And then after your primary education, you went to Allen Glen School, which in those days had a great reputation, particularly for science, but it seemed that it gave you a broad education in quite a number of areas.
Yes, it was science-based, and it was a very good school. We thoroughly enjoyed it. But one of the things it did was woodwork, metalwork, pottery, and engineering drawing. So I got quite a lot of arts as part of it, which I've enjoyed enormously, and still have some bits of it at home. So the arts side of things wasn't lost, although it was a science-based school.
And also, you were at that time you were developing your different sporting interests as well, and humour is a big part of your book. But tell us about your position in rugby and how that came about, and the skills that you had in that position.
Well, in the olden days, a hooker was able to move in the scrum. So I was a hooker, and not a very big one, as you can imagine. And quite often I was crushed in doing it. I broke my nose twice. Once, as a medical student, I was carried off shouting, "It's my greater occipital nerve," and it's because the whole of my scalp was suddenly had no feeling in it. So it's quite difficult being a wee guy playing rugby. And when I went to university, I continued to play rugby, but broke my nose again and gave it up.
And I think you captained a team that I played in occasionally, the Mudlarks.
Oh, the Mudlarks, amazing, yes. And after I gave up rugby, I played hockey, which I really enjoyed, until one day the ball hit my toe, came straight up under my chin, and knocked 3 teeth out. And I thought, that's probably enough sport for me.
But then you also, your father introduced you to the game of golf at a very early age.
Yeah, we had a wee golf course in Knightswood, just a couple of 100 yards almost away, and it was wonderful. On Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons, young boys could play for threepence, and it was great. And as you know, in the book, I used the sign which was outside the golf club. Each player must have at least 3 clubs, one of which must be a putter, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful story. And then I was going to ask you, if you had 3 clubs to choose, what would your 3 clubs be? And because we have, as you know, 5 club competitions now, but a 3 club would be even more interesting, I think.
One would definitely be a putter.
So,
And I think a 5 and probably, well, maybe even a wood, yeah.
that's very good. And tell me, then, as you progressed through Alan Glen's, you considered a number of career options, and the medicine didn't come like a bolt from the blue. It was more, I understand, from kind of family discussions and so on.
Yes, I've got a lot of cousins, and we still meet. It used to be every 5 years. It's now every 3 years as we all get older. But in one of these meetings together, they said, "And what are you going to do, Ken, when you leave school?" And I thought, well, I think engineering, bioengineering sounds good. And one of them said, "Why don't you do medicine?" And I said, "Okay, I'll do medicine then." And it was like that. So it wasn't. I hadn't grown up saying I'm going to be a doctor. That's what I really want to do. It was a quick change.
Yeah.
And one I've never regretted.
And of course, that then began a lifelong journey and partnership with the University of Glasgow. And I would like to hear something about your reflections on your undergraduate career and the key people that you met throughout that time, both professionally and personally. And I was particularly captivated about your story about Charities Day, which I remember very well. But that was a very important event for you, which you can perhaps tell us about.
Well, let me start with that, because when I was slightly younger, I always wanted to play the guitar, but didn't actually have any money to buy one. But I found that you could get a kit. So I got the kit and actually made a wooden guitar for myself. And as things progressed, I got a banjo and then ended up playing in a jazz band, which was great fun. And on Charities Day, we had a lorry. We were going to go around Glasgow. But one of the things we thought would be nice would be to have some girls dancing for us. And we, on the 29th of January 1960, we met the girls. We talked about what they were going to do and what they were going to dance and what we were going to play. And on the 30th of January, 60 years ago, we all went out and the girls danced to Charleston and we played our jazz as we went round the city, calling out Philip McCann, if you remember the words.
I remember that well.
And then back at night to the Union, and in the Union, the Clyde Valley Stompers used to play regularly, and we played it at half time. And at least one occasion, I played with the Clyde Valley Stompers. And that really is my most significant career move, I think, ever, to play with them. It was great fun, and being a medical student, I thought was just wonderful. There were so many things to learn. That's what I thought was good. It wasn't just one thing; it was everything. And you got to know, particularly in the anatomy class, those whose names were C or D, because that's the body you were dissecting with. And as we went through, I made huge friendships throughout my medical education, and again with teachers. It's amazing how good they were in helping you to think through some of the difficult things that you were going through. And I just enormously enjoyed the undergraduate. I nipped out to do a science degree in biochemistry. And that again, I was met some wonderful people. And although it added a little bit to my time at university as an undergraduate, it was great fun.
And you also, I believe, spent 3 summers working in Stob Hill Hospital, which, as you know, is very close to my heart. And you've got 1 or 2 stories about that, I believe, which are worth recounting.
Yeah, well, I worked in 3 summers, and the first 2 summers were in the mental health unit. And that was great fun, actually. They still had coal fires, and if you were on overnight, you could sit at the coal fire reading books and things like that. That was good. The problem was that on one occasion, I broke a thermometer, and that's nearly the end of the world. I had to put it into a back dish, cover it with a clean towel, and go to the matron and apologize profusely for doing this. And she said, yes, thank you. And the money was docked from my salary the following month. And I met her several times after this, and we got on quite well, but it was rather nice to do. The third time I was a theatre porter. That was actually very interesting too, being at the other end, taking the patient into theatre. But when people realised that I was a medical student, they asked me if I wanted to come in. So I occasionally came into theatre and saw operations and things. That was wonderful too, and confirmed, I think, that I was glad I was going to become a doctor.
Well, that was a great experience, and then just reflecting on your later life at this point, was there anything about your training as an undergraduate that informed your later life in terms of how to structure the medical curriculum? Were there areas in it that you felt, you know, if I had the opportunity, I would change this or that? Or it sounds like to me that most of it was a very good experience for you.
Yeah, I think it was a very good experience. I think you could integrate the subject a little bit more. Having anatomy on its own and physiology on its own is important in some ways, but it would be perhaps nicer to mix it. I think the one thing which I would change, and indeed I think helped to change a little bit, is to put some of the arts and humanities into the curriculum, so that you think slightly differently. And a little bit of the book is about setting up a course in literature and medicine for medical students. That was wonderful. Harry Burns was very much part of that as a student, as it happens, and it was a wonderful way of showing that you could think differently about patients and their families, about illness and health, and I think we could do more of that. And I understand at the moment, because I'm part of it, there is now a degree that you can take in the arts and humanities in the university as a medical student. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that does diversify. And of course, doctors have got, you know, there's a great list of doctors who became writers or who at the same time, like yourself, were writers and contributed greatly both to books and also to novels. I mean, Cronin was one, but there are so many of them that were successful. And in that arts and humanities, it's interesting because Benny Sweeney, who's married to a cousin of mine, was one of the people that was involved with you. I know that he, at the time in the late 60s and early 70s, did an arts degree first, and we all thought it was crazy. But in fact, he had the absolute right idea. And he always talks very fondly of his time with you and developing that course.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting looking back, well beyond, before my time, it was the normal pattern to do an arts degree and then move into medicine. And that's not happening now. But I think the fact that more of it's happening, more is going on in the undergraduate course to allow you to move into the arts, and that could be more than literature, I think is very, very, very positive and actually very helpful. And some of the stories are just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I was reading in regard to my A.J. Cronin research, I came across an article, I don't know how, in the Korean Journal of Medicine, and they mentioned your article in some detail from 1988. So obviously the message is getting out on an international level.
Yes, I don't have a copy of that.
Yeah. So then going into your medical career, and I should mention that at the moment, at that time, a PhD was bubbling away in the background, was it not, as you completed your undergraduate career?
Yes, when I finished the BSc, I did a couple of summers with John Milne, who was Professor of Dermatology at the time, and I got a couple of research scholarships during the summer. And that he said to me, why don't you do a PhD out of this? I said, well, okay. And I did that as a medical student. It took slightly longer than 3 years, but on Saturdays and at weekends and at night, I did a lot of this, and it was tremendous. And John Milne was a great person to work with. And I mean, my intention, I think, was that I was going to be a dermatologist when I grew up, but things changed.
Well, let's talk about that change and your graduation, and then going on to your house jobs, and just take us through that at that time, and because you met, I know, some very important personalities that were to shape a lot of your ideas for the future around that time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I got house jobs with Sir Andrew Kay and Ava Goldberg at the Western Infirmary, and it was wonderful with Sir Andrew. He had he was very good surgically, and just watching him, seeing patients and operate. But it was more than that, which I think I recognized a year or two later, was how he had brought together a range of amazing people. Peter Bell being one, Colin Mackay being another, Tom Gibson being another, and that group of people with the enormous skills and expertise, and very good at looking after you. You know, you felt you could do things with them. That was a great way to start in my surgical life, which is mainly in vascular and transplant surgery. Peter Bell had just come back from the States, and it was just great to work with him.
And you established really a lifelong friendship with Peter, who our family knew through a different route. My late sister had been as the house officer in Leicester, and her soon-to-be husband worked for Peter. So we've kept in touch with him all these years. But I know that you have kept in touch, because I was talking to Sir Harry Burns the other day, and he said a word that you've used a lot in your book, and that's happiness, or what a happy unit that was. People worked together and they gelled very well, and there was excellent support, mutual support. And I think that was an experience that stayed with you, has stayed with you for your life.
Yes, well, it was a way of thinking about how to organize things in the future. If you ever became a head of a department, how would you do it? And that happiness is important. Peter Bell and I are still in touch with each other regularly. He sends me emails, slides, jokes, sometimes twice a day. They're great fun. And if he's at the other end of the line, hello, Peter, I'm missing you.
And I think with the COVID situation, there's been an explosion of jokes coming through our internet and everything like that. And you said in your book that, I mean, you obviously had an early life of exams, and yet you found the fellowship the most exacting of them all. What are your memories of the fellowship exam, and what made that just so exacting, as it were?
Well, it was the written bit of the exam was fine, but it was the interview and asking questions. And actually, I don't think that it was the right question he asked. And I had to try and make up an answer to it, but that's why it was difficult. I thought, that's me, I'm gone, I'm finished. So not a chance of a fellowship, but he gave me it anyway, and it was pleasant. And that was interesting at the time, and maybe even in your time. The choice usually was to do 3 fellowships if you're going to be a surgeon: Edinburgh, London, and Glasgow. And I decided that wasn't what I was going to do. I was only going to do the Glasgow one because it was good enough for me. It would be good enough for anybody else. So I stuck to that and didn't do the Edinburgh or the London fellowship.
And then in 1974, there was what I would have to describe as a seismic change in your career direction. You were set in the way and you were fully qualified to become a consultant surgeon, and then things changed. Tell us what happened after that.
Well, I got an MRC fellowship in 1972-73, and because I was interested in immunology, I went down to the Chester Beatty Research Institute, which is part of the Royal Marsden Hospital. It was a wonderful year. I met some amazing people, including people like Cicely Saunders, and it was great. And I came back to Glasgow. I was a registrar. I had two doctorates, a number of publications, and a lot of experience, and I couldn't get a job. It was difficult at the time getting jobs. Then the Cancer Research Campaign, as it was, gave £500,000 to the University of Glasgow to set up an oncology unit. They looked around to see if they could find somebody to do this. They asked me several times to give them names of people at the Marsden, which I knew, and nobody seemed to want to take the job. And then there was a meeting between Sir Andrew Kay and Stuart McPherson in Chicago. They met each other, and Sir Andrew said, do you think wee Kenny would take this job? And Stuart McPherson says, yes, I think wee Kenny would. And this was told to me by Stuart himself. So at the age of 32, I became Professor of Medical Oncology at the University of Glasgow instead of being a registrar in surgery. And it was slightly strange. It was strange too when I took over, because in the olden days at the Western Infirmary, there used to be 2 queues for lunch, professors and consultants and another lot. And I went into the professor and consultants one, and they wouldn't serve me because I was too young. And eventually a English professor of cardiology came over to the woman and said, he's a professor, you know, so please let him have his. And the other one I heard, which is difficult, was 2 professors walking through the university saying, you have to smile at all these young people because they might be a professor, you know. So it was a complete change, but it was a wonderful experience over a 10-year period, developing a new specialty, really. And again, a great team around me.
What interested me about that was the merger of oncology as a discipline with the palliative care component, because often there seemed to be a situation where once the cancer doctors are finished with you, you go to palliative care. But you started to mould together a team which brought continuity to that care. So I'd like to hear about TAC-TENT and really these other innovative approaches to the lifelong care of patients with cancer.
One of the things that struck me as I got into the cancer area was just how important patients and their relatives were in terms of looking after themselves. They knew a lot more than I did. And I think my greatest learning experience was around this. What we did was we invited a number of people to our home, patients, relatives, and talked about how we could help with this. We had a couple of meetings at home, but then we opened this up in Gartnavel General, where we were at the time, to all of our staff and all of our patients. And we had 40 to 60 people coming along. There'd be a wee talk by somebody, and then we'd meet each other and listen and learn. It was just amazing. They set up little groups from Oban to Dumfries of people who'd had cancer, or were having cancer and having treatment, to talk to each other about it. And they did an enormous number of interviews. And for the team that I had, from the nurses, the pharmacists, the physiotherapists, and even to our scientists in the teams, for the scientists to come and meet patients with cancer when their job was to try and do something to change cancer, it was very powerful. And TAC-TENT is the old Scots phrase for take care. And it struck us as being a remarkable way of trying to help people by using other people to help them. And it continues as Cancer Support Scotland in a very nice little church at Gartnavel Royal Hospital. It was an amazing experience.
And that is quite interesting. When in my own specialty in cardiology, we eventually came to the view that palliative care and other non-malignant conditions was important as well. But there was quite a bit of resistance to that. But in fact, as time has gone on, it's been appreciated that you have to have this holistic approach to care of patients, which you achieve so well. And you had your ward in Gartnavel for a number of years as well, which was again, I think the first oncology ward in the city,
yeah,
or maybe even in the country. Yeah, and so again, that was I'm sure for you a very fulfilling period, and there was a lot of what you were doing at that time that came out of one of your favourite people to quote, and that's Sir William Osler, who really emphasised the importance of looking after the patient in their entirety, and that kind of approach to patients that you described before from Sir Andrew Watt Kay, and which you then adopted yourself. So I would have thought at that point you would say, this is my niche for life. This is me now. I'm settled down. I've established myself. But there was another twist, at least one other twist in the tale in 1984. And tell us what happened then.
Well, one of the things, and I've just mentioned it really, that interested me was how doctors were educated. And as we listened to patients in Tag Tent and their experiences of different doctors looking after them, I realized that we could do medical education better than we were doing it. And when the job of postgraduate dean with an interest in terms of postgraduate medical education came up, I took that. It was an opportunity to use some of the experience in medical oncology to think about how doctors could have better education and training and have a different approach to things. So that's why I took that as an opportunity to develop things further. And
of course, it's quite interesting that your article about A.J. Cronin brings out the fact that he identified in the 1930s the rather shambolic nature of postgraduate training. And so this was something obviously that you had in the back of your mind, and that was the start of quite a major revolution in the way young doctors were trained. So that was an interesting and I'm sure a satisfying time for you, working again in your alma mater with, I think you said, the best office in the campus.
But the view out the window was just wonderful.
That was good. And then after that, you became what's known as Scotland's doctor in 1989, and then you really were into the realms of politics and national guidelines, etc. So it was Scotland first in 1989, and then you moved on to be the CMO in England. So just taking these two together and maybe starting with Scotland, how did they contrast? What aspects do you remember about both positions? Firstly, the one in Scotland and then the one in England.
Well, one of the striking things when you get into that is the importance of two sides to things, the political side and the medical side. And on the one hand, if you're seen to be doing everything to help the medical profession, on the other side, you're doing everything to help the politicians, then you can get into difficulties. And what you have to be able to do is to be, in a sense, true to yourself and do the best that you can. In Scotland in particular, the senior civil servant was a chap called William Reid, now Sir William Reid, and he was immensely helpful in helping me to understand what the civil service was all about. But it was good, I think, meeting ministers. Malcolm Rifkin was there at the time. It was interesting to see how they operated. And similarly, in London, I had Virginia Bottomley first and then Stephen Durrell after that, interacting with politicians who could make a difference, who could change things. And that really was the point of it. Here I had learned a lot in clinical work, in surgery, in oncology, in postgraduate education. How can that all be delivered together to improve the health of a population? And that, I think, was a tremendous task. It was hugely enjoyable, as it happens, but pretty busy.
I think it sounded as if it was very busy. You would go through weeks without having a meal at your apartment in London. I think.
3 months at a time was not unusual to have not eat at home at all. We had a little house, and the assumption was that my wife would come and stay with me occasionally. but that proved to be just useless because I wasn't going to be there. So it made it quite difficult.
And then you were able to re-engage with your oncology interest when Virginia Bottomley, I think, asked you to look at this question of cancer services on a national basis and trying to equalise them. And this was the development in the Calman-Hein report. And you mentioned in your book quite a funny term that it was referred to.
Calvin Klein. Yeah, the Calvin Klein report. It was one of these. It's quite interesting. But Virginia, at the weekends, used to meet her constituents, and one of them had said, "I don't think cancer services are as good as they should be." And she came in on Monday morning and called me up as usual and said, "I've just heard from our constituents that cancer services could be improved. What are you going to do about it?" So that wasn't difficult, and we got people together and produced the report, the Calvin Klein report, which began to change the way oncology was managed.
That was a great achievement. And then you also, I don't know if this word's in the dictionary, Calmanization, but you then had which I remember well, was the restructuring really of postgraduate training at registrar and senior registrar level, and bringing in the specialist grade and trying to put more formality to the training and to try and direct the different programs that postgraduates went to. So just tell us how that came about, the question of this Calman organisation.
I think it came about in the same kind of way. There was a feeling that things could be better, and could we do something about it? At the time, or thereafter, I was reading another book by a chap called von Clausewitz on war. And if you want to win a war, there are 4 things you have to do. First, you have to get political will. If people don't want to do it, it won't work. And in this sense, political doesn't mean political in the Westminster sense. Secondly, you need a good, clear strategy. Thirdly, you need people on the ground to do something about it. And lastly, you need a line of ammunition, money, etc. Now, if you turn that into what we did in the postgraduate medical education bit, everybody wanted to do something about it, so it was good. The strategy was clear, which was good. There were people on the ground to deliver. The postgraduate deans had a great job to deliver that, and then we needed a resource, money, facilities, etc., and we managed to get that too. So that's why things changed. And it's I used to keep a little notebook in my pocket which said, here are the projects I'm involved in just now. And if you go through these 4 points, you could tell which ones were going to work and which ones were not. It was a very useful way of me rethinking how things could be done, because if people don't want to do it, no matter how much you try, it won't happen.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And that then became embedded. And I guess another theme running through your CMO in England was BSc, which must have been an ongoing and probably very worrying aspect for the country at that time.
Yes, it was, and it linked me into the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAF, regularly with the chief vet. It took me into the number 10 once or twice just to see the Prime Minister about it, because it was such an important area. It was very difficult. The thing that came out of it for me, and it's very relevant just now, is how you describe risk. And to say that something's safe doesn't mean it's not risky. And a lot of the work which I've been involved in after BSc has been how you describe risk, how you present that to the public in a way which is understandable and gives them the kind of power that they can to decide. And it's the same with politicians. They can't just keep saying this is a safe thing, because safe's not a clear word. So I learned a lot out of it.
And then, so CMO in England, and then you went then in 1998 to one of my favourite cities in the country. I visited there 2 or 3 times. It's just a delight, and that's Durham as Vice Chancellor. So that must have been a delightful experience. And coming through in the book very much is how happy you and Anne were in Durham.
It was a wonderful place to be. It's a beautiful city, wonderful cathedral, lovely people in the university and beyond. The people in the northeast of England are really lovely people. I enjoyed being there. To take a university like Durham, to expand it and develop it, was a great experience. And one of the nice bits was that the house we had, which was in the Botanic Gardens, it was a house which we had events in, and it was lovely. It was so nice. We needed to have a dog in it, and it was quite difficult to choose a name. But because it was such a religious city, we had to call our dog Mungo, and we had brought our own saint from Glasgow to be with us. It was just tremendous. The other thing that was really interesting were the chancellors.
Yeah.
The chancellor when I arrived was a chap called Peter Ustinov, who was just an extraordinary man. We used to have our degree ceremonies in the castle. It was a small place, very nice ceremonies, but it was something like 10 or 11 ceremonies a day because we could only do 100 graduates at a time. So we decided we should move into the cathedral. We got the power to do that, but Sir Peter was concerned in case if he told his jokes, lightning would strike and he'd be knocked out of it. He didn't, as it happens, and it was wonderful. And after him came Bill Bryson, and Bill was just a wonderful person to be chancellor. We got to know him. We still keep in touch.
I'm sure Sir Peter in particular added to the humour that's been a feature of the Calman family life for many years, and you freely admit to these corny jokes. I think you used to tell your children, but it obviously paid off because there's many aspects of your book that have humour in it, and now we have Susan who has shown herself to be a first-class comedian, but not only that, is now diversifying into other areas of very popular television. So that must be very interesting to you to have something that's just quite different from medicine, but very satisfying. Yeah,
no, it's lovely to see her. She's a great wee soul. And about 3 weeks ago, I decided I needed a new phone, and she's a new iPhone. So she came with me, and as I sat down, she said to the man, "This is my very elderly father. Don't ask him any questions, please, because he won't be able to understand them." And that just put me just exactly where I am,
That's very good. And just to say to our audience, please send in questions by all means as we move into the last part of the conversation with Ken. I think I'm good to move now to other aspects of your life. You came to Glasgow in 2006 as Chancellor by election, and our paths then crossed a lot more frequently. And I know that was a tremendously happy time for you in Glasgow, working with at a time when the university really was progressing in every way. So you must have been delighted to turn the full circle and come back as Chancellor.
Oh, it was wonderful, and it's been a remarkable job to be part of. Job's the wrong title. It was to be so central to what was going on within the university, to see these bright kids at graduations, to watch how the university developed was just a tremendous experience, and very, very fulfilling, wonderful.
Something that comes through very strongly in your life, Ken, is your Christian faith. And you've always had, you were in the Boys Brigade, and you then rose to the highest level that you could in that. But it's not just about that. It seems to me it's been something that's influenced your medicine and every other aspect of your life. And maybe just to tell us how that has, supported you through your life.
Well, I think it's been important from very early age that it's part about purpose, and the purpose that you might have in looking after people, either in health circumstances or non-health circumstances, to help people both in terms of their physical health, but also to be part of them in the community. And the faith that I have gives me the strength to do that. It's a difficult thing to do. It's very tiring and can be depressing. But at the end of the day, the purpose of it is to bring happiness to others. That's the key.
And that brings us very nicely round to this aspect of happiness, which you actually devote a chapter in your book to. And you know, it's something that we all speak. And a lot of what you quoted and what you mentioned in your book certainly has helped me to look at how you achieve happiness. It seems to me that it's through the knowledge and the hard work and the contribution towards others that you have found this happiness and contentment, you know, in this part of your life.
Well, one of the things that I did as Chancellor was I have a special seat in the University Chapel, and above that goes my coat of arms. I didn't have a coat of arms, so I had to design a coat of arms and have a motto as well, which sat above me and the last 42 chancellors since 1451. The motto I chose was Cum Scientia Securo, through knowledge I help others. That seemed to me to be what my life was really about. It wasn't knowledge in the sense of school knowledge, but it's knowledge about people, art, things, helping people to get over difficult problems. And that knowledge has been important to me, which is why, even though I'm far too old to do things now, I quite like using the knowledge I've got just to help others. And that, if you look back at what's changed in the world, it's been through people using that knowledge to help other people. And that's what it's about, I think.
And also in other fields that you've interested in, we haven't touched on the National Library of Scotland, which I've had the opportunity to visit several times recently, and your work with the National Trust. These must have been other majorly satisfying aspects of your life in recent years. Just maybe a brief word about libraries towards the end of our chat.
Well, libraries have critical importance to me from my days in Knightswood, which the public library was about 100 yards away. The National Library is astonishingly good. It's got great people in it now. It's got so much that you can get out to other people. I think it's fantastic. Again, the other thing there in the National Trust, which I think is very important, is the role of volunteers, people who come and help in buildings and in landscapes, etc. And they do a huge amount for nothing, but they do it because it helps other people. And the volunteers, both in the library and in the trust, are extraordinary.
And just to go back for a minute to humour, you know, that it's such a part of the book, and I love the story about saying how special your son-in-law is to you because he's at least a foot taller than the rest of us.
Yeah, he's remarkable. He's about 6'2". I mean, that's an abnormal height. And when he comes down to our wee house, he really is good. He puts things up in drawers and things like that. Marvellous.
And then you're lovely with your granddaughter teaching her Scottish words like she can say now, "I'm a wee sausage."
Yes. Well, these are the things that are important, I think, that they can say that properly. And when she speaks to the phone now, she said, "I'm a wee sausage." And what more could you ask for?
I know, that's lovely. And so just really, we're getting in a few questions now, but while we're just looking at these, what would be the three, if I were to say to you, what are the three most influential figures in medicine for you over the last 60 years of your career?
Well, there have been a lot of them, but let me just pick three in the clinical area. One obviously would be Sir Andrew Kay and all the things that he taught us. And I would add to that Tom Gibson, not only for his clinical skill, but his writing poems and his humour, I think. And the third one would be Cicely Saunders and her interest in palliative care. That was so important to me. If I moved outside medicine to other things, there are three people. One is Robin Downey, Professor of Moral Philosophy at the university, and he and I worked together very closely on the literature one. Sally Magnuson because of our Where Memories Go and the playlists. And I've got my own playlist, so that's building up when I get even older. And the third would be Sir William Reid from the Civil Service. He was a remarkable man. And the last group would be my family, who've really been amazing in helping me.
Oh, that's lovely. And I've actually got your playlist here, but I don't know if I've got time to go through it all. But I'm certainly going to put you forward for Desert Island Discs, because I would love to hear what you've got to say in that. Now, we've got some questions here that I'll just read out to you. Peter Reynolds asks, are there any jobs you regret not having done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought somebody might ask that. I don't think I've done it in those terms. It's opportunities that have come up which have built onto what I've done, rather than saying I wish I could do that. So I don't think there are any jobs. I've done quite enough, thank you.
And here's another one. Do we need another Calman Hine review of oncology services now?
I find that one quite difficult to answer, because they're not involved now. But I think every now and then it's a good idea to rethink where you've got to. And maybe now is a good time to rethink cancer services.
Right, now I'll just see if we've got any other questions here. Here's one just saying, Ryan, just saying, I was a medical student in Glasgow between 1971 and 77 when we were allocated a tutor along with 5 other students from the then 6-year course. Sir Kenneth Calman was my tutor, and I have fond memories of our group being welcomed into his home by him and his wife. It was a great scheme, and I have tried to continue this sort of hospitality and mentoring to students and staff during my career. I just wondered if you remember these get-togethers and know if it's still continuing as a formal setup in Glasgow. And that's from Val Kyle.
The answer is yes, I do remember them. And indeed, I had one myself, a chap called Willie Mack, who was a urologist. I used to go to see him about once or twice a year, and he and his wife were so helpful to me. I don't know if the tutor system continues, but for me it was a very positive one and very, very helpful.
And then we have a comment from Hani Atiba, just to say, inspired by your early life story, Sir Kenneth, your innovative desk in a cupboard is amazing. Hardship during the World War in Scotland was arguably behind the creation of greater men and women who are difficult to match.
Yeah.
So I was just going to reflect on the subtitle of your talk, which is Adventures in Life, Learning and Happiness. And I think that ties together very well with your motto, Cum Scientia Securo, through knowledge I help others. And it was that adventure which I believe brought you to happiness. I've been trying to find a clever quote which sums up your journey, Ken. I would suggest, however, that having been born on Christmas Day, that it can best be summed up by the title of that wonderful Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Yours certainly has been, and hopefully will continue to be for many years to come. And with that, it's a pleasure. Sorry, Ken.
Just two little things to mention, if I could, because that sums it up for me too. At the end of the book, there are 2 quotations I use. The first is by Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries, and in such a full sea we're now afloat. We must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. There's a time when you have to take opportunities. And the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, I think says it all too. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverged in the woods, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. And that, I think, sums up quite a bit of my own life and approach to it.
Well, this has been a most enjoyable and illuminating conversation, Ken, and I have read your book and I thoroughly recommend it to others. One of the fascinating features about it is, even though we didn't work closely in the early part of our careers, you know, our paths didn't cross, the number of people and the number of situations that arose in that book that rang a bell for me was excellent and added greatly to the enjoyment of the book. So we really are very grateful to you for your time this evening. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat, and it's a pleasure for me now to hand back to our President, Jackie Taylor, just to sum up.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both, Frank and Ken. We have been treated to really a wonderful journey through your life, Ken. Frank, if I could first of all thank you. I think Michael Parkinson definitely has a rival, and you've been wonderful at leading us through, expertly leading us through Ken's life. Ken, I'm sure that all of the audience here would like to just reflect on what an incredible life you have had, and I think we really have seen the many facets of your life and your personality this evening. Your tenacity, your dedication and determination, most definitely your modesty about your achievements, and your incredible ability and vision. And I think that for me has been very striking. Your vision and how ahead of your time you were in terms of valuing arts and humanities and medicine. The crucial role of team building, peer support, coaching, mentoring, things that we know are so important these days. And you've been working in that way right from the start of your career. And the importance of involving carers, which again, now we do appreciate the value and the importance that we must involve carers in the care of patients. You highlighted that your motivation for many of your roles has been to make a difference, and my goodness, you have most certainly made a difference to the lives of so many people through your defining cancer services, through your roles as CMO in Scotland and in England, and so much that you've done within postgraduate education and training that we are all still benefiting from. And also, I think, again, what is striking is that important message of humour and happiness within the working life. You mentioned William Osler. Now, I actually, there's a quote from William Osler that I often use in my teaching, and that is one that will be very familiar to you. The good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. And I think there is no doubt you have epitomized that in your life and in your work. So, as I said, this has been a very early Christmas treat for me and for your whole audience. So on behalf of the college, may I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It really has been a wonderful hour. So thank you. And again, Frank, thank you for your expert interviewing skills, another facet to your personality that I didn't know about. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening and good evening.